Here are the topics that will be covered in the President's Revision video. This video will focus on federal bureaucracy and the President's relationship with Congress and their ability to persuade. The federal bureaucracy consists of roughly 500 departments, agencies, administrations, authorities, and commissions that carry out responsibilities assigned to them through congressional legislation. Congress passes laws, the President signs them into law, and federal bureaucracy carries them out. These are unelected administrative bodies in the executive branch which set out into department agencies and commissions. They carry out policy on a day-to-day basis. Similar to the UK civil service, the federal bureaucracy is the backbone of the US government. And as you can see on the screen, they have 2.7 million employees. They have a payroll of 13.8 billion, and 11% of the employees are in DC, and they have roughly 500 departments. There are four categories of federal bureaucracy: executive departments, such as the Cabinet; executive agencies, like departments, but their heads do not sit in the Cabinet. Sometimes they are upgraded to the Cabinet. Examples of executive agencies are the Environment Protection Agency, EPA, or the Federal Reserve Board. There are also independent regulatory commissions. These are administratively independent of all three branches. They might regulate railways, radio, television, or banks, for example. There are also government corporations. They perform principally commercial functions that might otherwise have been carried out by the private sector, such as the United States Postal Service. Richard Neustadt, a lecturer at Harvard University and worked in the White House under Truman. He was then a friend and advisor to Kennedy, Johnson, and Clinton. He argues that in the 1960s that presidential power is the power to persuade. He said that a president has three assets: the power to persuade, its professional reputation, and its public prestige. Neustadt is talking about the president's power to persuade. We are now going to look at why the president resorts to persuasion and the different ways he can use this persuasion. President Truman once said, "I sit here all day trying to persuade people to do things they ought to have sense enough to do without my persuading them. That's all the power of the president amounts to." The problem with the executive branch is that almost every power it has is checked by the Congress. Therefore, the president needs to use powers of persuasion to succeed. However, in a system of separated institutions, sharing powers is by no means easy. In the terms of who the president needs to persuade, it is the staff within the White House, executive departments, Congress, the media, interest groups, and the public. When it comes to persuasion, there are essentially two methods. The president can use other people to persuade on his behalf, or he can get involved himself through the use of perks that he can offer. The president must work through other people if he is to be a successful persuader. There are four groups of people he can use. The vice president. All of the last 8 vice presidents from Walter Mondale to Kamala Harris have been former members of Congress. This is useful as it gives the president contacts within the legislative branch, which can be used for political capital. Members of Office of Legislative Affairs. These are members of the White House office who work as full-time lobbyists for the president on Capitol Hill. They meet with members of Congress as well as with senior members of staff. There are also the cabinet officers. The cabinet officers can be deployed by the White House to talk with members of Congress in their own policy areas. And finally, there is party leadership. The president can work through the party leadership in Congress. This includes the House Speaker, the majority and minority leaders of both houses, party whips, the committee chairs, and ranking minority members. It helps, of course, if the president and majority party leadership are from the same party. This was especially important and helpful for Obama, who experienced 2 years in the House and 6 years in the Senate, where Democrats had both the legislative and executive branches under their control. Personality plays a part here too. A gregarious president like Reagan and Clinton can develop good relations with members of Congress easier than a private and solitary president like Obama. Whilst the president has the ability to persuade through other people, the president themselves needs to get involved by utilising a range of perks at their disposal, such as personal phone calls, help with legislation which benefits members, states or districts, look favourably on relevant judicial or executive branch appointments, Oval Office meetings as a group or either as an individual, meet through Congress members, Campaign for Congress members at the next election. This, however, is only useful if the president is popular. Appeal more directly to the people and thereby going around Congress. This is called putting Congress's feet on the fire. An invitation to a bill signing ceremony, dinner with the president, a trip on Air Force One. However, all of these persuasions need to be a two-way street and need to include bipartisanship. In the run-up to the passage of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act in 2010, popularly known as Obamacare, President Obama made a number of attempts to persuade members of Congress to support the legislation. During a 2-month period between the 27th of January and the 20th of March, the President delivered the State of Union address to Congress, addressed the Republican House Issue Congress in Baltimore, took part in a televised session with the Senate Democrats in Washington, D.C., addressed the Democratic National Committee winter meeting in Washington, D.C., hosted a bipartisan healthcare reform meeting at Blair House, Washington, D.C., met with 11 House Democrats at the White House, met with the new Democratic coalition leadership in the Oval Office, and addressed the House Democratic caucus on the Capitol Hill. This was on top of addressing town hall meetings around the country, including those in Tampa, Florida, Nashua, New Hampshire, St. Louis, Missouri, and Strongsville, Ohio. The president's success rate in persuasion is measured each year in what is called Presidential Support Score. This annual statistic measures how often the president won in recorded votes in the House and Senate on which they took a clear position. This table shows the presidential support score between 1993 and 2015. It shows that presidential support tends to decline during a presidential term. Having one's party control both houses of Congress usually results in a high score. Loss of control of Congress means a dip in the score. Look at Clinton in 1995, George W. Bush in 2007, and Obama in 2010. It is important to consider that the score does not take into account importance of vote or bill, and the decline in number of votes on which the president have declared a decision. Let's look at whether the president still has the power to persuade. Before I go through the reasons for and against this question, test yourself to see how many you can come up with. Pause the video to give yourself this option. Reasons why the president still has the power to persuade are: the president has no formal disciplinary hold over members of Congress. Party discipline in Congress, though tighter than it used to be, cannot guarantee votes for the president. The president may be faced with one or both houses of Congress being controlled by the other party. The president is dependent upon members of Congress for legislation, confirmation of appointments, and treaty ratification. The president's direct authority has limited use. The president can offer his support for things that members of Congress regard as important. However, on the other side, it can be argued that the president no longer has the power to persuade as, in an era of partisanship, few, if any, members of Congress from the opposition party are open to presidential persuasion, especially on big-ticket items. Partisanship also makes persuasion a less useful tool for the president, trying to persuade voters to support him and pressurize members of Congress who will do so likewise. Presidents nowadays tend to have a low approval rating and a high disapproval rating, and therefore this makes their persuasion much less effective. Second-term presidents have also found their persuasive power to be very limited in their second term.